Hello and welcome back to the Damp Show. It's me, Damp Sam. Guess who's back? Back again. So this is a bit of an experiment. I don't know how it's going to go. I've been messing about with my computer and messing about with stuff. And I'm fingers crossed that we might have got so we can do a reaction video again. Hey! Yeah, so... Right, as I've been missing in action, I've been watching quite a few people on here doing damp videos, so there might be a few for us to go through. This one, it's by a bloke who I like, who does a good job, but I've seen that he's decided to move away from plastering and skimming, his normal job, and come into the specialised industry, into my sector. So, I'm going to watch this, and I'm going to have a look and see what Mr. Kirk Jonson, what he does with penetrating damp, and if he treats it right. So I want you to follow me while we watch this video together, and we'll see how Kirk gets on, because he's an expert in all things plastering. But is he an expert in damp? Let's find out. Come on, Kirk, on you go.
I got a message from a customer saying he had penetrating damp. What had happened was, a gutter outside had been leaking and it had been splashing against this wall. Over the years, it had rotted this window and soaked through the brickwork because there's no cavity in this house. So the customer's chopped off all the damaged area, managed to loosen a bit more plaster, which I've just took off, and now we're going to fix this up.
Right. One of the things that straight away I'm looking at, I'm wondering what he's using here. It's some kind of additive. It's some kind of additive that he's putting in. And I wish I could see what it is, because I have a feeling it's an integral damp-proofing additive. Let's have a look.
Don't add more than what's recommended because it would.
One thing I've noticed straight away, he's improvising a bit. So if you've not got a measuring jug, we have measuring jugs when we're on site, so it tells you fluid ounces and everything that you need to know, so you can get it bang on. And what it looks like that Kirk's doing there is, he's got an old water bottle, a pop bottle, and he knows how many litres is in your pop bottle. So he's using that as his measuring stick, which is a good tip, and I'm surprised they don't say it on here.
Weakens the sand cement. Here's a little tip for you. If you buy your sand in bags, it's really easy to measure out. 4 bags of sand and 1 bag of cement is a 4-to-1 mix. That's about the consistency you want.
And reason why it's a good 4-to-1 mix is, so I'll just add a bit more here. So reason why the 4 bags of building sand, or whatever, plastering sand, grit sand, whatever he's using, reason why it's a good mix is, and he's using a bag of cement, is that your bags are 25 kg. So if they're 25 kg, you know exact measurements. Only problem is I don't think he's going to be mixing 3 in 1 there, because he's only got a small bucket. I mean, that's normally when you've got a cement mixer, which will hold 3 bags or 4 bags. So 25 kg bags and 1 bag of cement is you're not far off your proportions there, because you used to say 4 in 1 with a shovel, and I think I've spoke about this before. You get more volume if you're digging it out with a shovel, so you don't get exact weights.
A little bit wetter than what a bricklayer would have it. The timber window has been replaced and the walls had time to dry out, but now before we put the scratch coat on, we have to wet the wall down again. This stops the cement drying out too fast.
The RHS presents the greatest...
Now, I don't know how I'm going to get rid of these adverts, so I think you're going to have to bear with me.
...show in Earth. On a stage set for magic and a carnival.
Lovely stuff. All I've added to the mix is integral waterproofer. That also works as a plasticizer, so the stuff's nice to use. Now, integral, all that means is that it's mixed in with the mortar. If it was just waterproofer, you might get confused and think you paint it on the surface. Integral just means it's in the mix.
Now, this is where I might have to pull him up a bit. I've not seen an integral waterproofer. I've seen an integral damp proofing liquid. I mean, I'm not saying they don't do it. They probably do. See, we use pre-bagged stuff, but an integral waterproofing mix. There's a difference between damp proofing and waterproofing. Now, damp proofing will allow water vapor to pass through any capillaries, or to pass through any voids that's in your render. And a waterproofer won't. A waterproofer blocks them. So a damp proofer will coat inside of a capillary and make sure that any water that tracks up it can't get through. But it'll allow water vapor, but not allow free water, so wet water, not water vapor as a gas. And if it's a pore blocker, so you've got pores, so that'll coat your pore. And if it's a pore blocker, that's your waterproofer, so it blocks the pore, so it stops any water, even water vapor, going through. And what you'd usually do, what Kirk were on about, is you'd render it. So you'd render it with an integral damp proofing additive in it, mixed correctly, and then you'd paint a polymer modified slurry on it to stop, which would block all surfaces. You put 2 coats of that on it, and it blocks any water vapor coming through or any free water. So that's kind of a waterproofer, and a damp proofing additive works.
Putting waterproofer in the mix just stops there ever being a chance of any more penetrating moisture in the future. Now, I'll tell you something interesting about integral waterproofer. All it basically is an alkaline soap of mixed fatty acids. And these fatty acids, they react with the cement, you see, and they form hydrophobic crystals. And what they do is they block up all the pores in the cement to stop the capillary action of water passing through it. Now, here's the interesting bit. You might be thinking, how did the chemical engineers come up with that? How did they know what fatty acids would do to cement? Well, a couple of thousand years ago, the Romans used to make a waterproof mortar to line the inside of their aqueducts and public baths with a mortar that was waterproof, and they used to use animal products like animal fat, milk and blood, which were all rich in fatty acids. That's it, all cleaned up.
And I can't argue with that.
So I'll leave that for a day or two, and we'll come back after the weekend. That's where we are for the second day.
Now this is something I won't do. So I won't be leaving that a full weekend, because it'll dry out. Even though it's got waterproofing liquid in it, it'll dry out as dry as a nun's private parts. See, I'm going to try not to swear on these videos. And what you'd normally do when you're rendering is you normally plaster onto it when it's green, but to let it fully dry out, I can see what his thinking is. He probably don't want it to crack. But when you're rendering, you'd have your strong mix, and then you have a weaker mix and a weaker mix and a weaker mix, and you can do that in 2 ways. So you can have your strong mix, which is a 3-and-1, and then you could have a 4-and-1 on top of that, which is a weaker render. and then a fibre one if you're building coats art. But it looks as if he's only got a thin coat to put on top of that. So let's see what he's going to do.
Can to dry out. We've got all our stuff ready to go now. Come on, I'll show you where we're up to. So, whilst we left this, what can sometimes happen is, especially if the bricks are really dry, is that as the stuff dries and the moisture's pulled out of it by the brickwork, it starts to shrink and split. Now, do you remember we damped the bricks down? So that hasn't happened, there's no splits, they look like little cracks. We haven't got none. It's perfect. So what we're going to do now is damp this down again and put another coat on. Right, what I'm doing now is just...
So I don't know why he's not putting SBR on. So SBR, and why he didn't put any SBR in his mix, because SBR is it can be used as a waterproofing additive with renders. And if it were me, I'd be making sure it would damp down. But so it's dried out, but then he's wetting it again. And he's got his own type of SBR, hasn't he? Pink SBR, what he sells to all your plasterers. That think it's better than just run-at-mill SBR for some reason. But I don't know. I'd have damped it down and then possibly put some SBR on, just so it's and add some SBR in both mixes so it'll bond to each other. And I want to wait a full weekend to do that. Probably went to the job late and couldn't be asked to work on a Saturday because it's an extra job for his mate or whatever.
Damping down the surface. Now you'll notice I'm just dipping the brush in and brushing it on. And what's going to happen is the water's going to on the surface and it's going to leave this little glisten where the water is. As soon as that glisten is gone and it just looks a dull damp colour like there, then you're going to start putting your next coat on. The reason I'm brushing it and not splashing it is because the waterproof is working the scratch coat and I don't want to drown it and have water sat in the scratches. So what can sometimes happen is water sits inside these and they fill up with water. That's not good because it'll take too long to dry out before we put the next coat on. We are literally just putting a bit of moisture on the surface.
This is how we made our workflow better than ever with Monday.com. It gave our team one central...
If your house was built after the 40s, you've more than likely got a cavity, so you don't really have to worry too much about penetrating damp. It only really applies to houses with a solid through wall.
You say, if it's after 40s, then more than likely, well, it probably will have a cavity, unless it's a single brick art building. But the date that we use as a cutting off point, and when I say we, I don't just mean me, I mean sort of historic societies like SPAB and architects, all these sort of associations, they all agreed on a date that for properties that you'd have solid walls before and cavity after, and date is 1919, and everybody refers to this date just so everybody's on the same page. So when I do a report, I'll say houses built, well, you've got so houses built after 1919 are referred to as modern, and houses built before 1919 are referred to as traditional. And as a rule of thumb, the say after has probably got a cavity, before has probably got solid walls. Now, there were houses with cavities built 100 years before that, but we have it just as a rule of thumb as traditional and modern.
Now, going back to our ancient mates, the Romans, there used to be a bloke called Vitruvius, and he was a military engineer, an architect, and he used to advise a bloke called Julius Caesar, so he was quite a big deal. Now, he wrote 10 books on architecture, and in his 4th book, he mentioned about damp walls should have cavities. So I want to ask you a question. Do you think that we've invented modern technology, or do you just think we've recycled ancient technology? And also, what do you think of the buildings? Did they build them more beautifully than us, or do you think our modern architecture's better?
I think you're getting it fucking all over. Fucking hell.
Okay, we're going to clean down all the edges, and then we're going to rule off.
You see, I know he's a plasterer, but all he's to get is some drop boards. And I wouldn't use that plastic stuff because it ends up slipping all over. But you can get like is it 3 or 5 mil, I think it's 5 mil, hardboard, and then we have them cut into strips. So an 8x4 board split into 4 bits widthways, 4 equal bits. Then you've got some drop boards. So we have it cut at builders merchants, and then you can put your sheet down, and then put your drop board up at top, and then you can just scrape up off of that. But I mean, he's just treading in everything there, which is just I can't look at it. And it looks like there's been an air vent there as well at some point, or some kind of vent.
So the reason you're cleaning the edges down
It's like dropping straight on.
because this sand's got a bit of grit in it, and it won't
A lot of grit in it.
blend into the original wall. It'll only go up to its If you don't clean the edges down,
Oh, it's all pain.
you'll end up with bits of grit juddering, and you won't get a nice straight line.
It just goes through me. Look at it, just dropping on floor. Why is he using a straight edge? Oh.
And what you're looking
I think here, and I'm sure Kirk has it. I've got a trowel that's just as wide as that. It's as wide as furthest part from there to there, which is like 18 inch. So all you do is you just turn it sideways, and you can just get a scrape round. There's just no need for using a great big straight edge like that. And I know he's going to say, I'm trying to get it straight with rest at wall. Rest at wall is probably bent.
for is any hollow sections. Just keep a bucket close by so you can just.
But you put all rest of shit on floor. What are you putting that bit in the bucket for? Just throw it on floor. Oh, going through, mate. Oh.
Now this is quite easy because I've got this wall to rule on.
There's another thing and all. I won't do it with face it trowel down. You do it, turn it other way around, and then scrape it down that way. It just goes through me that. It's all got grit on it anyway, but it's just.
And as I'm going, I'm just going to fill any slacks in.
He's not going to throw it on, is he? Look, his trowel's nearly as big, it's nearly as tall as that. He just doesn't need straight edge on.
For the majority of this
Got to
ruling
go
off
on
process, I'm using the wall that's already there. If you were plastering a whole wall, you'd rule off in a couple of different directions. I usually bring it up vertically, then horizontally, fill out the slacks as you go, then vertically again, and then horizontally again. After you've ruled it twice, you've usually got a true wall. Failing that, you could use screeds, but we'll cover that in another video.
The trowel's just as big as that. Just use back edge of trowel.
Okay, now, when you look close,
Look how much shit's on. See, look, he's all shit and that's on there, and he's just treading in it and then walking onto. There's like a lovely floor there. They've not covered that bit up, and he's just walking it into there with his trainers on. Fucking hell. It's all over windowsill. Look, he's not even covered windowsill up. I mean, all you need is a bit of hard floor protector. Just put it on there,
This is torn and open, especially if you know, look up here, see this? See how all that's torn? It's not smooth, it doesn't look like it's been closed with a trowel, like, come here, so you can see the texture difference. Come round and see that texture, right? It doesn't look like that, okay, see the difference? Now, the reason being, you want to leave that torn and open, because the air will get to it. So when you've ruled it off, just leave it with the rule, leave it open. And when that starts to feel crispy, like we're going to leave this now, when it starts to feel crispy on the surface, that's when we're good to start going with the float. So we'll come back. Later on, we'll leave it now.
Good plasterer, just be able to rub that up now.
When it feels crispy, we'll rub it with the float and put the key in, and then it'll be ready for skimming.
What is commercial property? There are 5 main types. I'm going to talk to you about some of them. Retail, that is one.
Oh, he's decided to clean something down now, has he?
Okay, it's been about 2.5 hours now.
My God.
And that is crispy on the surface. So look, you can still make an impression in it if you wanted to, but the actual surface feels like dried out. So that's what you're waiting for. And then what you want to do is get your float. Now, these are just polyurethane floats. Okay, you can buy these from Screwfix, B&Q, you know, any tool shop. And all you want to do, you're going to turn the float into what they call a devil float. Now, mine, I've used drywall screws, and what happens is you want them to just stick through ever so slightly. Can you see them there? Literally just sticking through. And what you're going to do, when you rub the wall, those little screws are going to cause a key for your finishing
damp it down though, mate. Just get it damped down before you start rubbing it up.
Sand and cement up. It's not so important when you're rubbing bonding or hardwall, but it is vitally important when it comes to sand and cement, because the skim, the finishing coat, will just show off if you don't provide a key. Now, you can use nails. I prefer screws, because as they wear down, you can just give them all quarter of a turn and they stick out a bit more. You don't have to have them in a row of 5 like that. For years, I just used to have one in the corner, and that was it. And as I did that, it left like a nice little circle all over. But you just get a lot more done with more screws. You can put one in each corner. You can have one in one corner, or you can do a little row like that. And then all you're going to do is just go over the work like this.
Figure of 8. More shit.
And what the float's doing, the float is knocking off any high spots, and it's consolidating all the sand and cement.
One thing I just want to mention is when he was saying that water had been dripping onto the wall in that corner and that it's penetrated through. So you've probably had a gutter leak. So once you fixed your gutter, then it should be all right. If it's been like that for a few years and they get loads and loads of rain, then what I think is that it could possibly get through. But if you look how thick that wall is, how these properties were built was that if it rained, rainwater could soak into brickwork, but it'd only get so far. And when weather conditions changed, then we'd be in lime mortar, it'd dry out quickly. But if it's been leaking in one place and he's never bothered shifting gutter, then there's a chance it could penetrate all the way through to inside. But I'd probably doubt it. I think what's happened is probably that it's created a cold spot, and then condensation's formed on this side rather than it coming all the way through. I mean, some might have got through if it's washed out pointing at, and it's like say if it was something like a bath waste what we're missing, and it was just all running down the wall, then it can get through to the other side of the wall. But usually with a property, owners would see it, you know, and they'd probably fix it or get somebody to fix it after a few months, and it don't continuously rain for 6 months. It's it rains for a bit and then it stops, weather changes and it dries out. So it could have been like that for God knows how long. Could have been just pouring down there, but it'd be more likely that it was, rather than faulty rainwater goods, it would probably be, an overflow, maybe an overflow from a tank that's just continuously running onto that corner, and then you could get some penetrating damp.
Now, if you want a big wall, you want to get into doing a figure of 8 motion like this. This is only a tiny little bit, so I haven't really got the space to be able to do that, to show you properly. So I'm just going to make sure that everywhere's keyed. That's the main thing.
I got the key, I got the secret, I got the
The idea is, on a big area, you work down the wall with a figure of 8, and then that way,
Figure of eight,
continuously
figure of eight.
leaving a key without rubbing it out at the bottom of the float.
I agree.
Slightly more difficult on little areas where you join up to walls. So the main objective is just to make sure you leave a key
I'd
everywhere.
love to know how much he's charging this guy. It's took longer to do that.
The float
than it has to
is
skim
knocking
the
off
room.
any high spots, but it also gets a little bit of a build-up around the edge. And if you get an area that you think perhaps is a little miss, a little hollow, you can take that stuff off and chuck it back in and work it into the wall.
Nice bit of cleaning
If you go in
down.
some older houses and you look at walls, maybe they've been built in the 60s or 70s, and you see little hairline cracks all over the walls, but the walls are solid. That's because the plasterer has come back the next day, like tomorrow, and skimmed over it. And it's lovely to skim over them because it's...
Not necessarily so. That is a cause that it's been skimmed while it were green, and what happens is, because it's a cement product, cement by its nature contracts and expands with weather as well, and as it dries out it shrinks. So what they say is skim it when it's drier, but more than likely they've put the coats on wrong, so they've not gone, because it's all different thicknesses, they've gone I don't know, a thin coat, then a thick coat, and then another thick coat, and they're all on top of each other, and then sometimes they don't bond to each other. There's loads of different reasons why, and yeah, this is one of them, but it's not the main reason. It's not just because they've skimmed it while it's green. It's normally because they've not built it up as it should be. A weak coat, a strong coat, a strong coat, then a weaker coat, then a weaker coat.
still damp, so you've got no suction. Now we can't do that because it causes those little splits. As this sets, it shrinks. We're going to leave it for the day and come back the day after.
We've come back 2 days later now. I'm going to scrape off all the little snots off.
Well, that an advert for his SBR. I was surprised he didn't put none in thingy about how much were he mixing up there, how much SBR. That's a snuff dry, that. Surely he's going to put some on there and then round onto the wall.
The wall, and we can start skimming. The cement has had time to shrink and dry out, so this would be a nightmare now if there was no waterproofer added in it.
Because SBR, the part of the wall we're going to blend into, we don't need to see all the sour cement. It's got waterproofer in it, so that'll be fine. It's got a key, and it's got waterproof to stop the suction, so we'll be fine to just skim straight onto this.
If you had 2 cars or more on finance between 2015 and 2021, you could be...
That looks
Let's begin.
like Carlight finish, that. I wonder if it's multi-finish. It don't look as dark as what we get.
Now, before you do this, it's a good idea to test the sand and cement. Give it a little flick of water and see how fast it draws in. Now I did this and it stayed damp for ages, so I knew that the waterproofer was working. If you find that there's loads of suction, it's a good idea to give the wall a good drink first. Damp it down, damp it down. In fact, keep damping it until it won't drink any more water, and then you're good to start skimming. Otherwise, you'll have a nightmare of high suction. But we have...
But if it's got a waterproofer in it, a proper waterproofer, it shouldn't do that. In theory, it shouldn't do that. It should stay as it is, and you shouldn't really need to damp it down. But again, you won't get me leaving it till it was snuff dry. I don't think. No.
I haven't got that because I've used the maximum amount of waterproofer. There's no suction with it whatsoever. To avoid the cost of waterproofer, and also to avoid the problem with the suction, this is what some fellas used to do in the past. They would skim it the next day when it was still damp. But as I said before, that cement still needs to dry out and shrink. And as it shrinks, that's what causes those little shrinkage cracks. So preferably the day after is good to go. It's just a case of trying to catch it right where the shrinkage has occurred, but it hasn't fully dried out yet. Skimming is one of my favourite aspects of plastering. Now, if you'd like to spend...
All aspects of plastering. That's every plasterer's fucking van. We do all aspects. There's got to be a better word than aspects, isn't there? All aspects on your fucking van.
The day skimming with me, there's still a few spaces left on the Plastering Experience day. Just click on the link in the description and book yourself in. Come and spend a day in Liverpool with me skimming.
Oh, no, not in Liverpool.
That ceiling is curved into the walls with a line painted straight. So rather than skimming everything, I've decided just to blend in. Now, the process that I'm following when I'm skimming is always exactly the same. I give it 2 coats of plaster, I flatten it in once, I trowel it with water twice, and then I polish it. It's always the same process no matter what I'm working on. I don't use flexi trowels, I don't use any other trowels, I just use the same carbon steel trowel.
Oh, tight, Daddy.
Look at this. See this? We keep cleaning this down in between, but the customer Tony's got a nice big architrave that's going to cover over all this once it's finished. So I don't really have to be so fussy up around here, but it's still nice to do a nice job for them, you know, even though it won't be seen.
I think I'd have probably gone right into the corner at half.
Now, before we mentioned a little bit about the Romans, and ultimately it was the Romans and the Greeks that brought about our classical forms of architecture. Now, I don't know if this is interesting to you or not, but the Victorians took it to the next level. And maybe if you like this sort of stuff, in the next videos, we could talk a little bit about what the Victorians did and the speed in which they used to build things and the quality of the buildings. But we'll just see. It might not be your thing. Now, just off camera, what you didn't see, at the same time as skimming this wall, I had 4 patches and another wall on the go all at the same time. So I was running around a little bit trying to get everything done all at once. You know what it's like? The customers always say to you, oh, there's just this little bit here and this little bit here if you wouldn't mind for us. But ultimately, it was a great family to work for. So that's it. Job done, all polished. Hey, we'll see you on the next one.
I might watch that later. Angry Karen refuses to pay. That came up other day, and I thought, I won't mind watching that. Have a look. I wonder why she's not paid him. Unless it's because he likes to do this. Unless they've not paid other customer, so he's gone and sorted it out. That could be it. Thoughts on his video? There's easier ways to do that patch. A lot easier ways. So there's quicker, more modern methods. I mean, he'll probably get slated by Lime Brigade because he's not done it in lime plaster and spent. I mean, it's took as long as what it would to do lime plaster. But this is why they've fetched out modern methods. It could have been boarded. it could have been boarded with a waterproof adhesive, some salt neutralizer, and it wouldn't have been as solid. So maybe his mate Tony wanted it in keeping with rest of the house, but like I said, it's probably a lime plaster. But and he's put a waterproofer on. So unless the house is ventilated correctly, what'll happen is condensation could form on that wall. Could form. I'm not saying it's going to do because it might be vented right. Condensation could form on that wall because it can't. Water vapour can't go through fabric as a gas. It can go through. I've kind of thinking myself out there. It can go through, but it'll go through at a slow rate. So water vapour will go through any material apart from glass, but it goes through at different rates depending on how dense it is. Now he's just made that really dense because it's waterproof. So what could happen is if it's because it's also a cold spot because it's a solid wall, condensation could form around there and black mould unless he's got adequate ventilation in his house. So it's first one back. I'm just going to check whether it's recorded. If it has and it's done all right, then we might be getting a few more and we might be getting a bit more sweary. So fingers crossed, and if not, I'll see you on next one. So I'm just going to have to work out how to turn this off. I think it's, hang on, let's have a look. Command, Shift, 5, and then I can turn it here. I can stop